You know that moment when your own daughter stands up at her wedding reception and decides to roast you in front of 150 guests? Well, that happened to me. But what happened next? Let's just say the room went from laughing at me to complete silence in about 30 seconds. Picture this beautiful wedding venue, crystal chandeliers, everyone dressed to the nines. You know that moment when your own daughter stands up at her wedding reception and decides to roast you in front of 150 guests? Well, that happened to me. But what happened next? Let's just say the room went from laughing at me to complete silence in about 30 seconds. Picture this beautiful wedding venue, crystal chandeliers, everyone dressed to the nines. The room chuckled. At 60, she decided she wants to build an empire. She actually used finger quotes and the laughter got louder. We keep telling her she should act her age, but she won't listen. I sat there smiling, dying inside as 150 people laughed at my so-called midlife crisis. They kept laughing. I didn't. I just smiled, still and calm, like a statue made of patience. I heard the sound of my own heartbeat beneath the music. I thought of every time I'd said yes, every time I'd stayed silent. Then, as the laughter reached its peak, something strange happened. The sound began to fade. The room shifted, uneasy, as if realizing the joke had gone too far. But what happened next? The room went silent. A few minutes earlier, everything felt perfect. I watched my daughter twirl beneath the chandeliers, her white dress shimmering like a promise. My heart filled with pride. The string quartet played softly, glasses clinked, and the scent of roses floated through the air. For a brief moment, I believed this day would be one of peace. Jake raised his glass toward me. "To the woman who made all this possible," he said. Guests cheered. I smiled and lifted my own flute, letting the warmth of the champagne calm the nerves beneath my skin. I thought about how far we had come, how much love I had poured into this family. I told myself the past was behind us, that the future could be gentle. Samantha looked radiant, laughing with her friends. Her happiness was everything I had worked for. I imagined her life unfolding with grace and ease. The music swelled. My reflection caught in the crystal glass. A proud mother, hopeful and steady. But even as I smiled, a strange chill passed through me. Maybe it was the way she avoided my eyes, or the faint smirk that followed her laughter. Something inside me whispered that pride often comes before the fall. I was so proud, before I realized what pride costs. Samantha took the microphone, her diamond bracelet catching the light. The music faded, and all eyes turned toward her. "I just want to thank everyone for coming," she began, her voice smooth and bright. "And of course my mom, who's been having what you might call a late-life crisis." Laughter erupted like applause. Someone near the front shouted, "Good for her!" My smile froze. I felt my face tighten, but I didn't move. She went on, joking about my new company, my silly little meetings, my late nights, pretending to be the next Oprah. The guests laughed harder. Their joy came in waves, each one cutting deeper. I wanted to look away, but my reflection in the silver centerpiece stared back at me, calm, composed, silent. My daughter didn't notice. She just kept talking, feeding off the crowd. "At 60, she said, she wants to build an empire." More laughter. I nodded as if I agreed, as if I too thought it was funny. But inside, a slow ache spread through my chest. Every laugh sounded like glass breaking. I held my breath, steady and quiet, waiting for it to end. They thought it was a joke. I thought it was a warning. The laughter echoed around me, bouncing off the marble walls. I forced a smile that didn't belong to me. My fingers tightened around the glass stem, but I didn't let it shake. A mother shouldn't ruin her daughter's moment. That's what I told myself. I looked at Samantha, her face glowing under the golden lights, and I tried to remember the little girl who once held my hand crossing the street. Somewhere between then and now, she had learned to mock what she didn't understand. I laughed softly, a sound so empty it disappeared into the music. My throat burned. I lifted the champagne flute again, letting it hide my trembling mouth. Around me, people still chuckled, unaware that I was slowly falling apart inside my silence. They laughed, I whispered to myself. I breathed. That's all I could do. I looked into the glass and saw the reflection of the chandelier. Bright, fragile, pretending to be strong. It looked just like me. 2 years before that night, I had nothing but time and a pile of bills. My husband had left. My career had ended with a polite letter. I sat at my kitchen table, morning light spilling through the blinds, and wondered if life after 60 was meant to be quiet. For the first time in 30 years, I was truly on my own. The air smelled like coffee and fear. I opened my planner and stared at the empty pages. They looked like a challenge. I picked up my pen and wrote one word. Begin. That single word changed everything. Days turned into plans, plans into late nights. I read books, took calls, reached out to old contacts. Slowly, something inside me started to wake up. The silence that once felt like defeat became the space where I could hear myself think again. You can fade quietly, or start over. I chose to start over. The first real test came at the bank. I stood in line holding a folder thick with contracts and transfer slips. When it was my turn, the young clerk glanced at the amount. "That's a lot of money," she said softly. "Are you sure you want to transfer $600,000? I smiled. "Yes," I said. "It's for my daughter's wedding." Her eyebrows rose. "That's generous. Must be nice to spend like that in retirement." I met her eyes and paused. "Sometimes," I told her, "retirement is just the beginning." She looked embarrassed, but I didn't mind. I signed the papers carefully, each stroke of the pen steady and deliberate. The sound of the ink sliding across the line felt like a promise. As I left the building, the wind caught my scarf and lifted it slightly, like a small nod from fate. My so-called retirement turned into long nights and glowing screens. I started with a tiny office, a laptop, and an idea to help small businesses find stability where I had once lost mine. I named it ML Holdings, my initials, my life's second draft. Elaine, my sister, laughed the first time I told her. "A company at your age?" she said. "That's cute." Samantha called it Mom's Hobby. Jake smirked. "That's adorable," he added. I didn't argue. I just nodded and went back to work. I spent my evenings sending emails, drafting proposals, running numbers until my eyes burned. Some nights, I fell asleep at the desk, the glow of the screen soft on my face. Every rejection letter was fuel. Every doubt was a quiet dare. "They called it a hobby," I whispered to myself one night, watching the sunrise through the window. "I called it my second life." Dinner at my sister's house was always an event. Polished silverware, polite laughter, and judgment served between courses. That night was no different. "So," Elaine said, slicing her steak, "how's your little company, Maggie? Still playing CEO?" The table laughed. Samantha added, "Mom's trying to be the next tech queen. She's adorable." Jake raised his glass. "It's good she's keeping busy. At her age, it's about staying active." Their words felt light, but they landed heavy. I smiled, nodding as if I agreed with every insult wrapped in kindness. My fork rested on the edge of the plate. I wanted to speak, to defend what I was building, but silence was safer. "Maybe it's time to act your age, Mom," Samantha said. The room went still for a moment. Then someone laughed again, and the noise returned. I swallowed the ache, steady and quiet. Sometimes love sounds like laughter. Sometimes it just sounds like dismissal. The day my first 3 contracts came through, I didn't tell anyone. I just sat at my desk, watching the numbers on the screen and feeling something I hadn't felt in years: quiet certainty. My small company, ML Holdings, was real now. Clients trusted me, results spoke for themselves. But when I mentioned it to my family, they smiled like I was playing dress-up. "They saw play," I whispered, "but I saw purpose." So I stopped explaining. I stopped seeking approval from people who only believed what they could see. The less I said, the stronger I became. At night, I worked with the window open, letting the Charleston wind carry away my doubts. Every email, every deal signed, became a brick in a foundation no one knew existed. I wasn't building noise. I was building something that would last. When success finally arrived, it didn't shout. It hummed quietly in the background, steady and certain. I didn't need applause. I only needed time. I stopped explaining. I started building. When Samantha announced her engagement, she cried from joy. I cried too, for different reasons. I wanted her happiness, so I offered to help. Quietly, I covered most of the expenses. The venue alone cost more than my first house. The planner was shocked when I paid the deposit without blinking, but Samantha had one request. "Mom, please," she said, "let me handle the presentation. Don't mention your business or whatever you're doing now." I nodded. She wanted perfection, and perfection demanded silence. So I smiled, hiding the sting behind my calm expression. Every invoice I signed, every check I wrote, was an act of invisible love. I never reminded her who funded the dream. I wanted her day to shine, even if it meant dimming mine. The planner shook my hand, thanking me for my generosity. I only said, "She deserves the best." And she did, even if she never knew how much it cost me. Not in dollars, but in dignity. She wanted perfection. I gave it, quietly. A week before the wedding, Samantha called me to the venue for a quick meeting. The planner waited with a folder of final details. Everything looked beautiful. The flowers, the lighting, the menu. Then my daughter turned to me, her voice low but firm. "Mom," she said, "one more thing. Please don't bring up your company during the speeches. I just want to keep things simple." I looked at her. My throat tightened, but I said nothing. I understood. She wanted control. I gave it to her. She wanted silence, and I gave it. As I signed the last page of the agreement, the ink spread like a soft shadow. The planner smiled nervously, unaware of the quiet storm behind my calm face. Some boundaries don't hurt because they're cruel. They hurt because they remind you how small people think you are. I folded the paper, placed it back into the folder, and whispered, "Whatever makes her happy." The morning of the wedding arrived wrapped in golden light. The ivory ballroom smelled of roses and champagne. I stood before the mirror in my ivory dress, modest, elegant, designed not to draw attention. I wanted to blend into the background, to let her have her moment. Elaine walked in and smiled faintly. "You look lovely," she said. "Simple suits you." I thanked her, even though her words carried a sting. As I fastened my pearls, I remembered Samantha's request. No mention of my company, no stories, just smiles. I practiced that smile now, soft and still, the one that hides everything. When the planner knocked on the door, I turned once more to the mirror. My reflection looked composed. No one would guess that beneath the calm surface was a woman who had built an empire no one believed in. "I dress to blend in," I whispered, "not to shine." During the cocktail hour, I stood near the bar, listening. Jake's colleagues from Sterling Technologies filled the air with talk about mergers, profits, and projections. Their voices were smooth, their laughter confident. They didn't know I owned the company they were discussing. I recognized the names, the numbers, the plans, my plans. Every word they said echoed the strategy I'd signed off just weeks earlier. I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. Instead, I sipped my drink and smiled politely. "You seem familiar," one of them said. "Do we know you?" "Maybe," I replied softly, "but probably not the way you think." They chuckled and turned away. I stayed there, calm and silent, watching them brag about deals they didn't understand. The chandelier above caught my reflection in 1,000 tiny fragments. I looked like part of the room, quiet, invisible, necessary. I knew more than they ever would, and kept quiet. The night before the wedding, I was reviewing my inbox when an email appeared. The subject line read, "Final approval, 12.8M merger." It was meant for Robert Hale, the COO of Sterling Technologies. My company's name was in the thread. Someone had copied me by mistake. I leaned back in my chair, reading every line. Numbers, contracts, deadlines, all under my authority. For a moment, I smiled. Then my phone buzzed. Samantha. "Mom," she said quickly. "Remember, tomorrow's about us. No work talk, okay?" I looked at the glowing screen. "Of course," I said. "I won't say a word." After the call, I stared at the email again. The cursor blinked, waiting. I closed the laptop gently. The room fell into darkness, lit only by the faint blue glow of the screen. They feared embarrassment. I feared exposure. The ceremony took place in the garden behind the ballroom, where the afternoon sun spilled over rows of white chairs. The air smelled of jasmine and salt from the Charleston breeze. Samantha stood at the altar, radiant, holding Jake's hands. For a moment, all the noise inside me disappeared. When she said her vows, her voice trembled, sweet and sure. I felt tears gather, and for the first time in years, they came from joy. The past, the pride, the hurt, all of it softened. As they kissed, applause rose around us like a wave. I clapped too, letting my heart rest for a brief moment. Elaine squeezed my hand. "You did it," she whispered. I nodded, unable to speak. For that one fleeting moment, love was louder than doubt. The sun dipped low, painting the sky gold and rose. I closed my eyes, holding onto the peace before it changed shape again. The reception began as twilight brushed the windows of the ivory ballroom. Soft jazz drifted through the air, mingling with the scent of champagne and roses. Guests filled the dance floor, laughter rippling like warm water. I sat at table 6, the table for relatives, the ones kept slightly out of view. From where I sat, I could see Samantha glowing beneath the lights, her dress catching every shimmer. She looked so happy. That was all I'd ever wanted for her. Jake leaned down to whisper something, and she laughed. The sound was light, effortless, like it belonged to another world. I smiled, clapping when the band changed songs. I blended in perfectly, quiet, pleasant, invisible. Even the waiter seemed unsure whether to refill my glass or skip me entirely. I didn't mind. Even in a crowd, silence finds me. And sometimes, it feels safer there. Amy, the maid of honor, took the microphone just after dinner. Her cheeks were flushed from champagne, her voice loud enough to command the room. "Let's talk about the bride's family," she said, grinning, "especially her mom." The crowd cheered. I froze. "She's a real inspiration," Amy continued, the sarcasm sweet as syrup. "At 60, still chasing dreams like a teenager. Isn't that adorable?" The guests burst out laughing. Someone whistled. I sat perfectly still. My face didn't move, my hands folded neatly in my lap. The laughter filled the room, bouncing off every mirrored surface until it felt endless. Amy giggled. "We love our delusional mom anyway." More laughter. My chest tightened, but I didn't look away. My eyes found Samantha across the room, and she was laughing too. My heart didn't break. It just quieted. When Amy sat down, Samantha stood up again, still holding her glass. "Oh, come on," she said, her tone playful. "Don't feel bad for her. Some dreams have expiration dates." The room erupted with laughter. Even Jake clapped. The spotlight hit her face just right, beautiful, confident, certain. She looked like she was performing for the world. I sat motionless, the noise pressing against my ears. My throat was dry. My smile stayed. I looked down at my hands, the soft tremor in them hidden beneath the tablecloth. She kept going, talking about my projects, my fun little ideas. Guests laughed harder, not knowing they were laughing at the woman who had paid for everything they were celebrating. They laughed as my heart quietly broke. I tried to breathe, to collect myself, when a man at a nearby table waved at me. "Excuse me," he said cheerfully. "Could you fetch a napkin for my wife?" For a second, I thought he was joking. Then I saw the sincerity in his eyes. He thought I was staff. I placed my glass down and turned to him. My voice was calm, steady. "I don't fetch napkins," I said softly. "I sign acquisition papers." He blinked, confusion spreading across his face. Around him, laughter continued, unaware that something inside me had shifted. I didn't feel humiliated anymore. I felt awake. The man stammered an apology. I nodded once, polite, unshaken. The reflection of my face in his wine glass looked sharper now, a woman remembering her power. I don't fetch napkins. I sign acquisitions. I sat there for a while, surrounded by the glitter and noise, realizing I'd had enough. My humiliation was complete, wrapped in gold and laughter. I looked toward the exit, the heavy double doors glinting under the chandeliers. I'll just slip away quietly, I thought. No scenes, no drama. I placed my napkin on the table and pushed back my chair. The soft scrape of wood against marble sounded louder than I expected. No one noticed. They were too busy laughing, dancing, living in a world where my silence made me small. As I walked toward the door, the music faded behind me. The air in the corridor felt cooler, cleaner. I breathed deeply for the first time that night. I wanted no confrontation, no spectacle, just distance. Quiet distance. I wanted no drama, just peace. Before I could reach the exit, a few guests intercepted me, all smiles and perfume. "That was such a brave speech your daughter gave," one woman said. "Good for you for trying new things at your age." And another chimed in, "It's inspiring, really, reinventing yourself after retirement." Their words dripped with sweetness, but every syllable stung. They meant well. That was the worst part. I smiled, nodding politely as they patted my arm, as if I were a child who had done her best at something small. "It's never too late," one man added, "as long as you're having fun." I looked at their kind, empty faces and wondered how people could bury cruelty inside compliments. They didn't see the work, the sleepless nights, the quiet battles. To them, I was a hobbyist in pearls. They meant well, but condescension wears perfume too. Jake appeared beside them, smiling like a host in control of his show. "Hey," he said softly, "don't take it hard. Rachel was just joking." He meant Amy, but names blurred when arrogance spoke. I looked at him. His eyes were warm but distant, the kind of look people reserve for someone they think is fragile. "You know," he continued, "at your age, it's about staying engaged, not building careers. You've already done enough. Just enjoy life." At your age. The words echoed like a bell struck too hard. I kept my smile. "You might be right," I said. My tone was calm, almost kind. But sometimes, doing enough isn't the same as being finished. He didn't get it. Most don't. He nodded, gave a quick chuckle, and walked away. I stood there for a moment, the echo of his voice fading into the music. At your age. Those words landed heavier than any insult. I slipped into the restroom and locked the stall. The world outside sounded muffled, distant, like another universe. I sat down, letting my hands rest on my knees, steadying my breath. My reflection in the metal divider looked pale, small, but alive. In that stall, I counted everything they didn't know, the meetings, the mergers, the late nights that built something real. They saw a mother with too much time. I saw an empire in progress. A tear threatened, but I blinked it back. I wouldn't give them that, not even in private. I pressed my hand against the cool tile wall and exhaled slowly. They saw a mother. I saw a portfolio. I stood, washed my hands, and fixed my hair in the mirror. The woman looking back wasn't broken. She was calculating. 6 acquisitions in 18 months. That's what I had done while they laughed. Sterling Tech, Broadline Systems, Meridian Software, each one negotiated with precision, each deal signed under my quiet initials, M. Lane. No one at that wedding knew. Not Samantha, not Jake, not even Elaine. I'd built something solid while they were busy treating me like a hobbyist. I didn't need validation. I had contracts. I remembered the scent of ink and paper, the weight of each signature. Those weren't dreams. They were facts. Real, measurable, profitable. They mocked paperwork. I bought their paper. I straightened my shoulders in the mirror, my reflection sharp and still. There was no anger in me anymore, only clarity. They could laugh all they wanted. I owned their laughter now, because I'd earned the silence that follows it. Leaving the restroom, I stopped just outside the door. Voices floated from around the corner. Samantha's voice, soft and dismissive. "This business thing is just her way to feel important," she said. A bridesmaid giggled. "She'll get over it once she realizes no one takes her seriously." Their words sliced clean through the air. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. They didn't know I was there. They didn't know their pity was the final insult. I looked down at my hands, the same ones that had built companies, signed deals, written checks for this entire event. Those hands trembled now, not from weakness, but from restraint. I turned away quietly, leaving their laughter behind me like an old coat. They didn't know it yet, but their pity had just ended my silence. I returned to the ballroom, the laughter still echoing from corners of the room. Everything looked the same, chandeliers glimmering, glasses raised, smiles painted in gold. But the air had changed. I sat down again, feeling strangely detached, like watching my life from the outside. No one noticed me slip back into my chair. A server passed by, asking if I wanted more champagne. I shook my head. My voice wouldn't have worked even if I'd tried. Around me, people toasted to love, to family, to futures they thought they understood. They weren't cruel, just blind. Blindness, I realized, is a privilege. It lets people laugh without consequence, speak without thought, and believe they're kind while cutting you open. I stared at the flickering candle in front of me, its small flame bending and rising again. It didn't fight the air. It adjusted. Silently, beautifully. So would I. I was tracing the rim of my glass when a shadow fell across the table. "Mrs. Lane," a voice said politely. "I hope I'm not interrupting." I looked up. A tall man in a dark suit stood before me, composed and curious. "I'm Richard Hale," he continued, "Jake's boss at Sterling Tech." The name sent a jolt through me. Sterling Tech, the company I had quietly acquired just 3 months earlier. "Of course," I said, offering a small smile. "Lovely to finally meet you." His handshake was firm, respectful. He seemed unaware of the invisible thread connecting us. Around us, the music continued, but something heavier settled in the air. Fate, maybe. Or just timing. Sterling Tech. Of course. Richard Hale smiled politely, unaware of the quiet storm he had walked into. "So," he asked, "you do consulting?" I returned his gaze. "Acquisitions and operational restructuring," I said softly. He nodded, interested, but not yet understanding. "Ah, mid-size firms?" "Mostly those ready to scale," I replied, my tone even, careful. He looked impressed. I could tell he was trying to place my name, searching for familiarity. There was a flicker in his eyes, recognition just out of reach. I let the silence stretch between us, calm and controlled. Around us, laughter continued, but it felt far away. I wasn't part of their noise anymore. I was waiting for the inevitable connection, the moment truth would finally find its voice. A young woman approached Richard, whispering something urgently in his ear. Her name tag read Emily. I watched her face pale as she glanced at me. "That's Mr. Lane," she whispered again, louder this time. "Her name's on our merger documents." Hale froze. The words traveled faster than the music. Guests at nearby tables turned their heads, curiosity spreading like a spark in dry air. I stayed perfectly still, my hands folded, eyes calm. I had been invisible all evening. Now, invisibility was ending on its own. Whispers moved faster than music. Richard looked straight at me, the confusion in his eyes giving way to realization. "Have you worked with any companies I might know?" he asked slowly, though I think he already knew the answer. I held his gaze. "Yes," I said. "Sterling Technologies." The room didn't fall silent right away. It hesitated first, like a held breath before a storm. Then the noise began to fade. A few nearby guests turned toward us. Richard's face changed, recognition striking like lightning. "You're the M. Lane?" I nodded once. "Yes," I said softly, "the one you work for." He blinked, stunned. The champagne glass in his hand trembled. Around us, laughter died, replaced by a silence sharp enough to cut. And just like that, the balance shifted. Richard Hale went completely still. His hand froze halfway between his drink and his mouth. "You acquired Sterling Technologies?" he whispered, as if saying the words too loud might change their meaning. I nodded once. 3 months ago. His eyes widened. The chandelier light flickered against his glass as he tried to process what I'd just said. Around us, the laughter of guests began to falter, curiosity rippling through the room like a quiet tide. Someone nearby whispered my name, unsure, testing it. "You're the M. Lane?" he asked. "Yes," I said softly, "the one you work for." The space between us thickened with silence. His glass trembled, the champagne inside quivering with it. I held his gaze without blinking. For the first time all evening, someone finally saw me, not as a mother, not as a joke, but as the woman behind the signature. Richard's voice broke the stillness. "Half this room works for you," he said quietly. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The truth was already traveling faster than words. Across the tables, whispers started. Faces turned. Forks stopped midair. The laughter that once filled the ivory ballroom vanished, replaced by a strange hum of disbelief. I sat perfectly still, hands folded in my lap, calm, unbothered, observing. Richard leaned closer. "I had no idea," he murmured. "I know," I said. "Most people don't look until they need to." He exhaled sharply, his breath shaky, and glanced around as realization spread from one face to another. The hierarchy of the room was rewriting itself in real time. Respect travels slower than gossip, but it hits harder. Richard began to apologize, words tumbling over themselves. "Mrs. Lane, I didn't mean to—" I lifted a hand slightly. "Please," I said. "Not tonight. It's my daughter's wedding." The way I said it stopped him cold, not angry, not proud, just steady. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was reclaiming space. He nodded, still pale. "Of course," I smiled faintly. "You didn't offend me. You just reminded me why I built things quietly." The silence between us felt sacred, heavier than the laughter that had filled the room an hour earlier. For the first time, I didn't feel small in that space. I felt grounded, anchored. Not revenge, just clarity. Jake noticed Richard's stiff posture and hurried over, smiling in that easy way of his. "Everything okay here?" he asked, glancing between us. Richard looked at me for permission before answering. I gave him a single nod. My calm seemed to steady him. "We were just discussing business," Richard said, voice low. Jake chuckled. "Oh, business? Careful, my mother-in-law takes hers a bit too seriously sometimes." Richard didn't laugh. The tension in his shoulders gave him away. I said nothing, only sipped my champagne. The light caught the glass, and for a second, the reflection showed all three of us. Arrogance, awareness, and silence. Sometimes truth needs an audience. Jake gave a soft laugh, unaware he was standing before his own undoing. "It's cute how seriously she takes her business," he said lightly. "But it keeps her busy, right?" The word cute hung in the air like smoke. Richard's face froze. I didn't react. I didn't need to. The sound of his laughter felt distant, almost pitiful. Around us, a few guests noticed the shift. The balance of power had quietly tilted. Richard's jaw tightened. He turned toward Jake, his voice calm but sharp. "You might want to be careful who you call cute," he said. Jake blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" I stayed still, eyes lowered, heart steady. The moment I had never planned was unfolding exactly as it needed to. "Cute," he said, while standing before his employer. Richard turned to Jake, his tone quiet but certain. "Jake," he said, "she's not playing business. She is business. Your mother-in-law owns Sterling Technologies." Jake blinked. The color drained from his face. "What?" Richard nodded slowly. "She's your boss's boss's boss." A hush swept through the surrounding tables. I didn't move. I let the words travel through the air on their own, landing exactly where they needed to. Jake's smile faltered. The laughter that had once filled his voice dissolved into silence. I looked down at the tablecloth, tracing the rim of my glass with my finger. The world around me had changed without me lifting a hand. For the first time all evening, truth had done the talking for me. I stayed still, breathing evenly, my reflection glowing in the golden light. Jake shook his head, trying to laugh it off. "That's impossible," he said too loudly. "She drives an old Honda." Richard gave a slow, almost pitying smile. "Serious investors prefer modesty." The words hit Jake harder than he expected. He looked at me again, but I didn't meet his eyes. I didn't need to. His confusion was enough. The silence between us grew heavy, pressing down until his arrogance began to crumble. "She doesn't flaunt power," Richard added. "She embodies it." Jake opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Around us, the noise of the ballroom dulled to a low murmur. I lifted my glass and took a slow sip, watching the bubbles rise and disappear. The same people who had laughed at me now stared like they were seeing me for the first time. The whispers spread like ripples through still water. M. Lane, Sterling Tech. Acquisitions. Every name, every rumor, every startled glance reached another table. Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Someone dropped a fork. The sound was louder than it should have been. I sat motionless, the center of a storm no one could see coming. My hands stayed folded, my breathing calm. It only takes one truth to silence 100 laughs. People who had ignored me minutes ago were now whispering my name as though it carried weight. The chandeliers flickered, light trembling across their faces. Slowly, the laughter vanished completely, leaving only the sound of the band fading out mid-song. The ballroom, once loud with mockery, had turned into a cathedral of silence. Richard stepped toward the stage, his expression solemn. He reached for the microphone and tapped it once. The soft echo filled the room. "Excuse me, everyone," he said. The murmurs stopped instantly. He looked out over the guests, then turned to me. "We owe this woman an apology," he said clearly. "Margaret Lane isn't just the bride's mother. She's the owner of Sterling Technologies and several other companies represented here tonight." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Samantha's face went pale, her bouquet trembling in her hands. Jake stood frozen beside her. I didn't rise. I didn't wave. I simply looked down, calm, letting the truth echo for me. She's not dabbling. She owns us. The ballroom erupted, not with noise, but with shock. People whispered my name like a prayer and a warning at once. Some guests stood, others sank into their chairs. Samantha's mouth opened, but no words came out. Richard kept speaking, his voice steady. "Half the people in this room work for her. The rest benefit from what she built." I remained seated, still as marble. The reflection of the chandelier shimmered across my glass, fractured light dancing over my fingers. The chaos around me felt far away, like waves crashing against distant rocks. They laughed at her empire while living in it. Samantha's bouquet slipped from her hands, petals scattering across the floor. Jake covered his face. The band had stopped playing. All that was left was silence, and me, sitting in the middle of it, breathing evenly, finally seen. Samantha turned toward me, her voice trembling. "Mom, is this true?" The microphone trembled in her hands, the sound of her breath echoing through the speakers. Richard looked at her, then back at me. "I think Miss Lane should answer that," he said quietly. I rose slowly from my chair. The room held its breath. Every eye was on me. I looked at my daughter, my only child, standing there in her white gown, beautiful, terrified, small. "Yes," I said. "It's true." My voice didn't shake. "You called it a crisis. I called it construction." The words filled the space like light breaking through fog. I didn't explain further. I didn't need to. The silence that followed was louder than applause. Samantha's lip quivered, her eyes wide with disbelief. For the first time that night, I wasn't the one shrinking. I held the microphone for a moment, feeling the weight of it in my hand. I kept quiet, I said softly, because you asked me to. The room was still. Even the air seemed to pause. Samantha's face broke into tears, but I stayed calm, my tone even and low. I didn't come here to prove anything, I continued. I just wanted to see my daughter happy. So I stayed silent, because sometimes silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's mercy. A ripple of realization moved through the guests. Some bowed their heads. Others couldn't look at me at all. I set the microphone down gently on the table. The sound of it resting echoed like a closing door. Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's mercy. Samantha's voice broke through the quiet. You never told me. I looked at her, steady and calm. Because every time I tried, I said, you rolled your eyes. She blinked, her expression collapsing into guilt. I didn't know. I know, I replied. That's why I stopped explaining. Her tears streaked her makeup, each drop cutting through the perfection she had built around herself. I wanted to hold her, but not yet. She needed to see before she could understand. You told me my dreams had expiration dates, I said softly. But the truth doesn't expire. Her shoulders sank. The room stayed hushed, the weight of my words settling like dust after a storm. Jake stepped forward, his face pale, his voice breaking. I feel like such an idiot, he muttered. I laughed at you. I doubted you. I raised a hand. Stop, I said gently. You don't need to apologize for not knowing. You just need to remember before judging the next person. He swallowed hard, shame written across his face. I thought I was protecting Samantha's image, he said quietly, but I was just protecting my own ego. I gave him a small nod. Maybe next time, listen before labeling. He nodded again, eyes lowered, his confidence cracked wide open. Age doesn't limit vision, I said. Arrogance does. The words didn't sound sharp. They sounded like truth. Amy, the maid of honor, stood near the table, her cheeks red, eyes glassy. She clutched her empty champagne glass like a shield. Miss Lane, she whispered, I'm sorry. For the speech. For all of it. I turned toward her, my expression soft but unreadable. Now you know why I smiled, I said quietly. She nodded, tears falling fast. The people who had laughed with her minutes ago were now silent, their shame hanging heavy in the air. Amy set her glass down, her voice trembling. I thought it was harmless. Cruelty often thinks that, I said. Her head dropped, her shoulders shaking. I placed a napkin in front of her, folded neatly. Kindness looks foolish, I said, until truth shows up. The words lingered as the camera flashes blinked like fading stars. The photographer approached me quietly, camera hanging from his neck. His voice trembled. Miss Lane, he said, I took a photo when they laughed at you. I wanted to delete it, but I couldn't. I looked at him, surprised by his honesty. Why not? I asked. He hesitated. Because it didn't look like humiliation. It looked like strength. For a moment I said nothing. The flash of his camera had once blinded me, trapping me in their laughter. Now it became proof of something else. Endurance, grace, control. Keep it, I said softly. That's what strength looks like. He nodded, eyes wide, as if he'd been forgiven for more than a photograph. The camera clicked once, the sound gentle this time, respectful. The image he captured wasn't of a woman broken by shame, but one reborn in silence. The room began to change. Faces that had once smirked now softened. Conversations hushed. People shifted in their seats, glancing toward me with a mix of awe and discomfort. It was the quietest kind of transformation, one born from realization, not words. Funny how quickly awe replaces laughter. I stayed seated, calm and composed, letting their stares wash over me. Every whisper that once mocked me now carried my name with reverence. A few guests rose and walked closer, not to speak, but to look, as if confirming I was real. I met no one's eyes for long. Respect, when it finally arrives, doesn't need acknowledgement. It just needs stillness. Respect arrived late, but it arrived. When the noise faded to nothing, I stood. The microphone still lay on the table where I'd left it, untouched since the truth had spoken for me. I brushed my fingers against it once, then turned toward the door. Each step felt light, like the air had shifted under my feet. The silence behind me was no longer heavy. It was reverent. No applause followed. No one dared fill the space I left. Even the music had stopped. The chandeliers cast soft reflections over the floor, and for a moment, it looked like I was walking on light. No applause, just understanding. I pushed the ballroom door open, the sound of it echoing like closure. The cool air of the corridor met me, and I smiled for the first time that night. I hadn't taken more than a few steps when I heard my name. Turning slightly, I saw a few guests approaching, faces pale, eyes wide, guilt and admiration tangled together. "We didn't know," one woman whispered. Another added, "If we had, we never would have." I stopped her with a small wave of my hand. "You weren't supposed to know," I said. "That's how grace works." They nodded, speechless. The same people who once laughed now looked smaller. Their confidence dimmed under the weight of truth. Grace never announces itself. It arrives quietly. I left them there in that silence, not as their lesson, but as their reminder. Some truths don't need defending. They just need time to be seen. Samantha stood by the stage, the bouquet gone, her hands trembling. When I walked toward her, she couldn't meet my eyes. "You endured all that humiliation," she whispered, "just to protect me." I stopped in front of her, close enough to see the reflection of the chandelier in her tears. "You needed a lesson," I said softly. "Not an enemy." She nodded, her voice breaking. "I didn't know what I was doing." "I know," I said. "That's why I forgave you before you asked." Her face crumpled as the weight of the night finally hit her. I reached out and brushed a tear from her cheek, not as a mother wronged, but as a woman who had already made peace with it all. Mothers don't seek revenge, they seek remembrance. 6 months later, the world around me felt softer. Jake now called me Miss Lane in meetings, half joking, half respectful. He'd stopped interrupting mid-sentence. Samantha visited often, her tone gentler, her laughter quieter. Even Elaine, my sister, had turned from critic to public admirer. One evening at dinner, Elaine raised her glass. "To Margaret," she said proudly, "the woman who rebuilt her life after 60. The table laughed warmly. I only smiled. Funny how tone changes when truth arrives. Jake leaned over the table. "We're all trying to keep up with you now," he said. I met his eyes, steady but kind. "Don't," I replied. "Just keep up with yourself. Respect ages well. Mockery doesn't." Outside, the lights from Charleston Bay shimmered against the window pane. For the first time in years, the sound of laughter around me didn't sting. It simply felt like peace. Samantha sat across from me in a small office with soft blue walls, her hands twisted in her lap. "I disrespected who you are," she said quietly. "Not because I hated you, but because I couldn't understand you." I nodded, watching her fight her own tears. "That's where we start fixing it," I said. She breathed out slowly, eyes glistening. "I thought success was noise, but you built everything in silence." I smiled. Silence builds better foundations. For the first time, her face softened in a way that reminded me of her childhood. Open, unguarded, human. The air between us felt different now. Healing starts where pride ends. When she stood to leave, she turned back and said, "I want to make you proud again." I whispered, "You already are." Jake arrived one afternoon holding a thick folder. "I need your advice," he said sheepishly. "This new contract looks good, but I'm not sure." I took the papers and scanned the first page. "You missed something," I said, pointing to a small clause at the bottom. "Read the fine print, Jake." He chuckled nervously. "You caught that fast." I smiled faintly. Life hides in fine print, too. He nodded, taking notes seriously this time. It wasn't just about the contract. It was about humility. For once, he was listening, not talking. He stood to leave, then paused. I never thanked you properly. You just did, I said. Read the fine print. Life hides there, too. Elaine called one afternoon, her voice bubbling with excitement. You're not going to believe this, she said. I told the ladies at the club about your company. They think it's inspiring. I laughed softly. I thought you once called it my midlife hobby. She paused, embarrassed. Well, hobbies don't open offices across the state. We met for lunch the next day. She wore gold jewelry that glinted in the sunlight. You built an empire, she said proudly. I shook my head. No empire, just structure. She looked at me curiously. You always did prefer blueprints to crowns. I smiled. Crowns slip, foundations don't. I didn't build an empire. I built order. The new ML Holdings office opened on a quiet morning, sunlight streaming through glass walls. The gold lettering gleamed above the entrance, simple and elegant. Richard Hale walked beside me, his voice calm. Ready for the next acquisition, Miss Lane? I nodded. Always. Inside, the team buzzed with quiet purpose. Desks filled with sketches, charts, and contracts, all the things I once handled alone in my kitchen. Now others carried the work forward. I stood by the window overlooking Charleston Bay. The reflection of light on the water mirrored the path I had taken, steady, deliberate, unseen until it was complete. Growth doesn't roar, it breathes. The sound of typing and distant laughter filled the room like music. I didn't need applause. The work itself was enough. The roses had grown wild that spring. I knelt in the garden with pruning shears, trimming the branches one by one. The air smelled of salt from the bay, soft and familiar. Each snip felt like a small release. I built companies, but what mattered most were roots, not branches. A petal fell onto my hand, pale and trembling in the breeze. I thought of that night at the wedding, of laughter and silence, of everything I had pruned away since. I spoke softly, to no one. You cut what's dead, you keep what blooms. The sunlight broke through the clouds, casting gold over the garden. I smiled, steady and peaceful. I prune what's dead. I let light in. And in that moment, I realized that forgiveness grows best in open air. One morning, a letter arrived in a plain white envelope. No name, no return address. Inside was a short note written in careful handwriting. I was one of the people who laughed that night. Your silence taught me more than any speech could. I read it twice, then placed it gently on the table beside a dried rose from the garden. My hand rested on the paper for a moment before I smiled. Sometimes repentance travels by mail. I didn't need to know who sent it. The apology had already done its work. Outside, the wind brushed through the curtains. The house felt full again, not with people, but with understanding. I folded the letter once, slipped it into a drawer, and whispered, "Lesson received." In the evenings, I often sat by the window overlooking Charleston Bay. The light reflected across the water like liquid silver. At 62, I learned that dignity doesn't raise its voice, it stands still. The curtains swayed gently as the wind carried in the scent of salt and jasmine. I took a slow breath, feeling the rhythm of quietness match my pulse. Stillness speaks. I no longer felt the need to explain the past. The world outside moved quickly, but peace has its own pace. I had built something beyond business, an equilibrium between strength and softness. I sipped my tea, smiled at the empty chair across from me, and whispered, "It's enough." The morning light touched the water, warm and forgiving. I stepped onto the balcony, barefoot, letting the breeze wrap around me. People sometimes ask about my late-life career change. I always smile, because the truth is simple. Never underestimate a woman who's done being underestimated. I leaned on the railing, eyes tracing the horizon. Everything I'd lost had turned into something better. Clarity, peace, purpose. There was no anger left, only memory, the kind that hums quietly instead of shouting. Behind me, the house was filled with soft light, framed photos, and the sound of a life rebuilt from silence. I closed my eyes. The wind moved through my hair, gentle as forgiveness. That's my story. I've learned that silence can reveal what pride hides, and dignity never needs to prove itself. Was Samantha's public embarrassment justified, or should I have handled it differently? You tell me. Every family carries its own kind of storm, but sometimes the calm that follows teaches more than the thunder ever could. If my story finds you tonight, I hope it reminds you grace isn't weakness. It's power that doesn't shout. Let me know what you would have done. And if you've ever been underestimated, remember, you're not alone. There's still time to rebuild, no matter your age, no matter the room that once laughed at you. The morning paper sat folded neatly on my doorstep. Across the front page, a headline read, "The Woman Who Rebuilt at 60." I laughed softly, shaking my head as I carried it inside. The photo showed me holding a pair of golden scissors, cutting the ribbon at the grand opening of our new office. I didn't want fame, only impact. Reporters called it a comeback. I called it a continuation. As I read the article, I noticed the journalist had written, "She teaches that quiet success speaks louder than public noise." I smiled. For once, someone had understood. The ink on my fingertips felt warm, alive, proof that stories, even silent ones, can find their way to print. They wrote about a comeback. I called it a continuation. The phone rang one evening, pulling me away from my papers. A familiar voice filled the line. "You disappeared, Margaret," Ruth said, her laughter soft. "Everyone's wondering what happened to you." I smiled. "No, Ruth, I just stopped explaining." There was a pause, then the kind of laughter only old friends share, warm, unguarded, forgiving of time. "I should have known you'd land on your feet," she said. "I didn't land," I replied. "I built new ground." We spoke until the light faded. When the call ended, I poured myself a cup of tea and looked out the window. The sky was painted with gold and violet, calm and certain. I didn't vanish. I evolved. Weeks later, my assistant brought me an envelope. "You'll want to see this," she said. Inside was a donation receipt, $200,000 to the Golden Grace Foundation. The donor's name read, "An observer from the wedding night." I sat back, heart still. Even guilt can fund something good. The money wasn't the point. It was the meaning. Somewhere out there, someone had carried that night with them long enough to turn regret into grace. I looked out toward the bay, sunlight glinting across the water, and whispered, "Thank you." I didn't know who they were. I didn't need to. Some apologies don't arrive in words. They arrive in action. Months later, Samantha stood on a stage at a women's business forum. I sat quietly in the front row, watching as she adjusted the microphone. "My mother taught me," she said, "that silence can teach louder than anger." The room grew still. Her voice didn't tremble. She showed me that forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's remembering without resentment. I felt my chest tighten as pride and peace met in one quiet moment. Some lessons are learned in front of everyone. The audience stood and applauded, but I stayed seated, hands folded, eyes glistening. When she stepped down, she didn't speak. She just hugged me, the kind of embrace that needs no words. The phone rang again, this time a producer from a national network. "Miss Lane, we'd love to feature your story. Millions would be inspired." I paused, smiling faintly. "That's kind," I said. "But some stories belong to quiet places." He hesitated. "Are you sure? It's a powerful message." "It already reached the people it was meant to," I said. The call ended, and I walked to the window. The curtains swayed, the bay shimmered below. Fame was never the goal. The lesson wasn't for the world, it was for my family. Some stories shine brighter in silence. I returned to the ivory ballroom one quiet afternoon. The same chandeliers hung above, their crystals now gathering dust instead of applause. Sunlight spilled across the empty floor, painting long golden lines where laughter once echoed. I walked slowly to the spot where I had once sat, the place where humiliation turned into truth, the The silence didn't sting anymore. It comforted. This is where laughter once hurt and healed. I closed my eyes and listened. I could still hear faint traces of that night, the clink of glasses, the hush that followed the reveal, the first moment of peace that belonged to me. Rooms remember, but they forgive too. I left a single white rose on the table before walking out. The Golden Grace Foundation opened its doors that spring. Women from across the state came, carrying folders, sketches, and trembling hope. I watched each of them walk in the way I once had, unsure, underestimated, ready to start again. What began as humiliation, I told them, can become a seed for others. We offered microloans, mentorship, and quiet encouragement. No press releases, no cameras, just work that mattered. One woman asked, "Why call it Golden Grace?" "Because gold endures fire," I said, "and grace survives pride. Humiliation can finance hope." The foundation wasn't charity, it was continuation. A legacy built not from revenge, but renewal. That evening, Samantha came by with flowers, white roses. She stood at the gate, nervous but smiling. "You remembered," I said, opening the door. She nodded. "You pruned the roses. I just watered them." We sat on the porch as the sky turned amber, the wind soft against our faces. The years between us felt smaller now, bridged by something gentler than forgiveness. Understanding. "I used to think you were cold," she said. "I was just quiet," I replied. "There's a difference." She reached for my hand. We didn't speak after that. We didn't need to. You pruned, I watered, and the garden bloomed again. A year later, I walked into the Sterling Tower for the first time since the merger. The boardroom was sleek, filled with quiet confidence and new faces. Richard Hale greeted me at the door. "Good to see you, Miss Lane." Beside him stood a young woman, the new CEO I had been mentoring. "Ready?" I asked. She nodded, steady and poised. I took my seat at the end of the long glass table. "Legacy," I said, "means letting go while holding steady." The meeting began, voices blending into the hum of progress. I leaned back, content. A good leader prepares exits, not excuses. That weekend, my grandchildren ran through the house, filling it with laughter. "Grandma, tell us the story," Lily shouted. "Which one?" I asked. "The one where they laughed, and you didn't," Ben said, eyes wide. I smiled. "Ah, that one." We sat on the rug as the afternoon light poured in. I told it softly, with pauses where silence did the talking. They listened like it was a fairy tale, though every word was true. When I finished, Ben whispered, "Did it hurt?" I smiled again. Only until I remembered who I was. The one where they laughed, and you didn't. That night, I stood before my mirror. My hair had silvered, my eyes deeper now, but they were steady. Power looks different now. It wears peace. I traced a wrinkle at the corner of my mouth, a line drawn by restraint, not regret. The reflection didn't look like the woman they once mocked. She looked freer, lighter, whole. I touched the mirror, as if thanking it for showing both who I had been and who I had become. The house behind me was quiet, filled with the sound of a life reclaimed. Power wears peace. The wind rose softly over Charleston Bay as I stepped outside. The horizon stretched wide and gold, the same color as forgiveness. They mocked what they couldn't see. I forgave what I couldn't explain. In the end, silence spoke for me. I stood there for a long moment, watching the water ripple in the light. There was no music, no applause, only the sound of the wind and the calm rhythm of my breath. Justice doesn't shout. It remembers. The camera would fade to white here, the sea and sky blending into one final image. A woman standing still, no longer fighting to be seen, only being.